The winter of 2005 brought more than just snow to the small town of Pine Grove. For 15-year-old Destiny Williams, it marked the beginning of a journey that would change not just her life, but an entire community's perspective on love, loss, and the true meaning of family. Living with her grandmother since she was 3, Destiny had grown accustomed to the gentle rhythms of their modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. Her grandmother, whom everyone called Miss Rose, worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and warmth in their home. The story of why Destiny's mother wasn't around had always been a delicate subject, wrapped in whispered conversations and carefully avoided questions. That December morning started like any other. Destiny helped Miss Rose prepare her famous sweet potato pie for the church's annual Christmas gathering. The kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg as they worked side by side, their hands covered in flour, sharing quiet moments between grandmother and granddaughter. "Baby girl," Miss Rose said, her voice carrying a weight Destiny hadn't heard before, "there's something we need to talk about." She wiped her hands on her worn apron, the one with tiny red cardinals that Destiny had given her 3 Christmases ago. "I've been keeping something from you, something you deserve to know." Destiny's heart skipped a beat. Her grandmother never kept secrets, it was one of their unspoken rules. They told each other everything, from the smallest daily triumphs to their deepest fears. But the look in Miss Rose's eyes told her this was different. "Your mama," Miss Rose began, her voice trembling slightly, "she didn't abandon you like I let you believe." She pulled out a chair at their small kitchen table, motioning for Destiny to sit. "She's been writing letters, sending them through Sheriff Thompson all these years." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Destiny gripped the edge of the table, her mind racing with questions. "Letters? All these years?" The words came out barely above a whisper. Miss Rose reached into a high cabinet, behind the good china they never used, and pulled out a weathered shoebox. Inside were dozens of envelopes, each one carefully dated and preserved. "Your mama's been in prison, baby. She made a mistake, a big one, but she never stopped loving you." The revelation hit Destiny like a physical blow. Her mother, whom she'd pictured as a distant figure who'd chosen to leave, had been writing to her all along. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone, there was a letter for each one. With shaking hands, Destiny opened the first letter. The paper was thin, the handwriting neat and careful. "My dearest daughter," it began, and tears blurred her vision before she could read more. That afternoon, Miss Rose explained everything. How Destiny's mother, Olivia, had been caught up with the wrong crowd in her youth. How one bad decision led to another until she found herself taking the fall for a crime she'd participated in but hadn't planned. How she'd made the heart-wrenching choice to have Miss Rose raise Destiny rather than have her daughter grow up in the foster care system. "Sheriff Thompson," Miss Rose continued, "he's been helping us all these years. Keeping track of your mama's progress, making sure the letters got to us safely. He's been more than just a law officer, he's been our guardian angel." The revelation sparked something in Destiny. If her mother had been writing all these years, if she'd never truly abandoned her, then maybe there was hope for a connection. She turned to her grandmother, determination replacing the shock in her eyes. "I want to see her. Can we visit her for Christmas?" Miss Rose's face softened with understanding. "Sheriff Thompson mentioned she's eligible for visits now. But baby, are you sure? This is big, really big." Destiny looked down at the letters scattered across the table, each one a piece of the mother she'd never known. "I'm sure, Grandma. I need to know her, not just through these letters, but really know her." The next day, they made their way to the sheriff's office. The old building stood tall against the gray December sky, its brick facade both intimidating and somehow reassuring. Sheriff Thompson, a man Destiny had seen around town but never really known, welcomed them with kind eyes and a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I've been waiting for this day," he said, gesturing for them to sit in his office. The room smelled of coffee and old papers, with a Christmas wreath hanging slightly crooked on the wall. "Your mother, she's done everything right, Destiny. Completed her education, counseling, job training, everything she could to be better for you." As Sheriff Thompson spoke about the visiting procedures and what to expect, Destiny felt a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. Fear, hope, anger, love, they all swirled together like the snowflakes falling outside his window. "There's something else," the sheriff added, pulling out a folder from his desk. "Your mother's case has been under review. With her record of good behavior and the new evidence that's come to light about the original crime." He paused, making sure he had their full attention. "There's a possibility she might be released early. Maybe even in time for next Christmas." The news hit Destiny like a wave, washing away the last remnants of the story she'd told herself about her life. Her mother wasn't just a shadow anymore, she was becoming real, tangible, possible. As they left the sheriff's office that day, the snow had started falling harder, coating Pine Grove in a blanket of white. Destiny clutched the visiting forms to her chest, her mind already racing ahead to the meeting that would change everything. Miss Rose wrapped an arm around her granddaughter's shoulders as they walked to their car. "You're the bravest person I know, baby girl. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, just like we always have." That night, Destiny sat in her bedroom, reading through the letters one by one. Each envelope contained pieces of her mother's life, her thoughts, her dreams for her daughter. Through the words on these pages, a new story was emerging, not one of abandonment, but of sacrifice, love, and hope. As she read, Destiny realized that her life hadn't just been shaped by absence, but by the presence of love in all its complicated forms. Her grandmother's unwavering devotion, Sheriff Thompson's quiet guardianship, and yes, even her mother's distant but persistent love, they had all been there, weaving together to create the tapestry of her life. The Christmas visit was set for the following week, and as Destiny drifted off to sleep that night, she held on to one thought: sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped not in shiny paper and bows, but in truth, second chances, and the courage to face them both. As the days crept closer to the scheduled visit, Destiny found herself spending hours in front of her mirror, practicing what she would say. The small collection of photographs Sheriff Thompson had provided showed a woman with her same deep brown eyes and gentle smile, features Destiny had never recognized in herself until now. The morning of the visit arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed Pine Grove in pristine white. Miss Rose had ironed Destiny's best dress 3 times, though they both knew it wasn't about the clothes. The burgundy fabric felt stiff and formal against Destiny's skin as they drove through the quiet streets, the heater in their old Buick struggling against the December chill. "Remember," Miss Rose said softly as they approached the prison gates, "whatever happens in there, you're strong enough to handle it." Her grandmother's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, betraying her own nervousness. The prison wasn't what Destiny had expected. Instead of the dark, forbidding fortress she'd imagined, it was a complex of plain buildings surrounded by high fences. Sheriff Thompson met them in the parking lot, his police cruiser already dusted with fresh snow. "You ladies ready?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. He'd taken the day off specifically to be there for them, something that made Destiny's heart swell with gratitude. The processing took nearly an hour, forms to sign, IDs to check, security procedures to follow. Destiny's hands trembled as she removed her jewelry, placing her grandmother's gifted cross necklace in a small locker. The guard who searched them was gentle, explaining each step with patience that suggested she understood the weight of this moment. Finally, they were led to the visiting room. Unlike the cold, sterile space Destiny had imagined, it was painted in warm beige tones with children's drawings taped to the walls. Christmas decorations, paper chains and snowflakes, hung from the ceiling, a touch of humanity in an otherwise institutional setting. "She'll be brought in shortly," the guard explained, gesturing to a table near the middle of the room. Other families were already there, having quiet conversations across similar tables. The sound of muffled laughter from a young child meeting their parent made Destiny's throat tight. Miss Rose squeezed her hand. "Just breathe, baby girl. Just breathe." The door on the opposite side of the room opened, and Destiny's heart stopped. Olivia Williams walked through, wearing a beige prison uniform that couldn't diminish her natural grace. She was thinner than in the photographs, with a few strands of gray in her dark hair, but her eyes, Destiny's eyes, were bright with unshed tears. For a moment, neither of them moved. The space between them felt both infinite and microscopic. Then Olivia took a tentative step forward, her hands clasped together as if to keep them from shaking. "Destiny?" Her voice was soft, musical, exactly how a mother's voice should sound. "My baby girl?" The carefully rehearsed words vanished from Destiny's mind. She stood, her legs unsteady, and before she knew what was happening, they were embracing. The smell of standard issue soap couldn't mask what Destiny somehow knew was her mother's natural scent, like warm vanilla and something indefinable that felt like home. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered into her daughter's hair. "I'm so sorry." The words came between quiet sobs that shook both their bodies. When they finally pulled apart, Miss Rose was there, her own tears flowing freely. The 3 generations of Williams women sat together, forming a triangle of love, loss, and redemption at that simple prison table. "You got my letters?" Olivia asked, her hands reaching across the table but stopping short of touching Destiny's, uncertain of her welcome. Destiny nodded, finding her voice. Just yesterday. Grandma told me everything." She paused, gathering courage. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The question hung in the air, heavy with 15 years of silence. Olivia looked at Miss Rose, then back at her daughter. "I wanted to protect you. I thought knowing your mama was in prison would hurt you more than believing I'd left. I was wrong. I see that now." Sheriff Thompson, who had been standing discreetly nearby, pulled up a chair. His presence felt right, he'd been part of their story all along, after all. "Your mother's been doing remarkable work inside," he said, his deep voice gentle. "Teaching other inmates to read, starting a mother support group. She's helped a lot of people find their way back to their families." Olivia blushed at the praise. "I had to do something with all this time. Had to make it mean something." She looked at Destiny with eyes full of hope and fear. "I know I can't make up for the years we lost, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be part of your life now." The conversation flowed easier after that. Destiny told her mother about school, about her dreams of becoming a social worker, about the little details of her life that mothers should know. Olivia shared stories too, about her own childhood, about the mistakes that led her here, about her hopes for the future. As their time drew to a close, Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. "The guards approved this," she said quickly, seeing Sheriff Thompson's surprised look. "It's not much, but—" Destiny unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a delicate paper crane, folded from what looked like pages from a book. "I learned origami in here," Olivia explained. "This crane, it's made from the first letter I ever wrote you. I kept a copy, and, well, I thought you should have it. They say paper cranes bring hope." The simple gift held more meaning than any expensive present could have. Destiny held it carefully, seeing the words, "My dearest daughter," visible on one of the wings. As they said their goodbyes, promising to write and visit again soon, Destiny felt something shift inside her. The anger she'd carried, the hurt of abandonment, it wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something else. Understanding, maybe. Or forgiveness. Or both. In the car ride home, as Miss Rose and Sheriff Thompson discussed the possibilities of Olivia's early release, Destiny held the paper crane and watched the snow fall outside her window. Her life had changed fundamentally in the past 2 days, yet somehow she felt more grounded than ever. She thought about all the other families they'd seen in the visiting room, each with their own story of separation and hope for reunion. Maybe this was why she wanted to be a social worker, to help other families find their way back to each other, to help other children understand that love sometimes takes unexpected forms. The paper crane sat on her bedside table that night, catching the moonlight that filtered through her window. Tomorrow, she would start writing her first letter to her mother, not as a stranger, but as a daughter beginning to understand the complexities of love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. The days following the prison visit passed in a blur of emotions and revelations. Destiny found herself staying up late, writing and rewriting her first letter to her mother. The words had to be perfect, they needed to bridge 15 years of silence while somehow acknowledging the new reality they were stepping into. At school, everything felt different, though nothing had visibly changed. Destiny carried her secret like a precious stone in her pocket, occasionally taking it out to examine it in private moments. Her best friend noticed the change in her first. "You seem different," she said during lunch break, as they sat in their usual spot under the old oak tree. "Like you're glowing or something." Destiny considered keeping the truth to herself, but the weight of the secret felt too heavy to bear alone. As she shared her story, her friend's eyes widened with understanding and compassion. There was no judgment, only support, the kind that made Destiny realize she'd been afraid of others' reactions for no reason. Meanwhile, Sheriff Thompson had become a regular visitor at their house, bringing updates about Olivia's case and sharing stories about her progress over the years. One evening, as Miss Rose served her famous peach cobbler, he brought news that made them all pause mid-bite. "The review board is taking a serious look at her case," he said, his weathered face hopeful. "The new evidence about the original crime, well, it shows she was more of a bystander than a participant. Plus, her record inside has been exemplary. They're considering a hearing for early release." The possibility of her mother's freedom, which had seemed like a distant dream, suddenly felt tangible. Destiny found herself imagining simple things, walking through the park with her mother, sharing breakfast, introducing her to her friends. But with hope came fear. What would it be like to have her mother in her daily life after so long? Miss Rose seemed to sense her granddaughter's turmoil. That night, as they sat on their worn porch swing, watching the winter stars, she shared her own struggles. "You know, baby," she began, her voice soft in the cold night air, "when your mama first got into trouble, I was so angry. Angry at her for making those choices, angry at myself for not seeing it coming. But then I got your mama's first letter from prison." She paused, reaching for Destiny's hand. "She wrote about how scared she was, not for herself, but for you. That's when I realized, love ain't always simple, but it's always worth fighting for." The next few weeks brought more visits to the prison. Each one got easier, the awkwardness melting away like spring snow. Destiny learned that she had her mother's laugh, her love for crossword puzzles, and her habit of tucking hair behind her left ear when nervous. Small discoveries that felt like finding missing pieces of herself. Olivia shared more stories during these visits, about her life before prison, about the night everything went wrong, about her journey to redemption. She spoke about the women she'd met inside, many of them mothers like her, all carrying their own burdens of regret and hope. "There's this one lady," Olivia said during one visit, "been here 20 years. Never had a visitor, but she helps everyone write letters to their families. She taught me how to make those paper cranes. Said every fold is like a prayer for the people we love." The story touched something in Destiny. That weekend, she gathered art supplies and spent hours making Christmas cards for the women in her mother's unit. Each one contained a message of hope and a small paper crane, carefully folded with instructions she'd found online. Sheriff Thompson helped deliver the cards, and when he returned, his eyes were suspiciously moist. "You've got your mama's heart," he said simply. As Christmas approached, the possibility of Olivia's release became more real. The hearing was scheduled for early January, and their lawyer, provided pro bono through a prison reform program, was optimistic. But Destiny learned that hope was a complicated emotion, mixed with equal parts joy and fear. One night, unable to sleep, she found Miss Rose in the kitchen, making hot chocolate like she used to when Destiny was small. Without words, they understood each other's sleeplessness. "What if?" Destiny began, staring into her steaming mug. "What if everything changes when she comes home? What if we don't know how to be a family?" Miss Rose pulled her close, smelling of cocoa and comfort. "Baby girl, we've been learning how to be a family all along. Your mama might have been behind walls, but love don't recognize barriers. We'll figure it out, just like we've figured everything else out, together." The truth of those words settled into Destiny's heart. She thought about all the ways love had shown up in her life, in Miss Rose's sacrifices, in Sheriff Thompson's quiet dedication, in her mother's persistent letters, in her friends' acceptance, in the kindness of strangers who taught prisoners to fold paper cranes. That weekend, Destiny started a project. She gathered all her mother's letters, carefully copying the most meaningful parts into a journal. Between the passages, she added her own thoughts, photographs, and pressed flowers from their garden. It would be her Christmas gift to Olivia, a bridge between the years they'd lost and the future they hoped to build. As she worked, Destiny realized that her story, their story, was bigger than just them. It was about second chances, about the power of truth to heal, about the many faces of love. It was about a community that could choose to judge or support, and had chosen support. The last letter she copied into the journal was the most recent one, received just days after their first visit. In it, Olivia had written, "Every night, I look at the same stars you see, and I think about all the ways love can travel, through letters, through prayers, through paper cranes, through the kindness of others. Sometimes the longest journeys bring us right back home." Destiny closed the journal, running her fingers over its cover. Soon, very soon, they wouldn't need letters to bridge the distance between them. Soon, they would begin the journey of becoming a family in the everyday moments, in shared breakfasts and homework help and Sunday dinners. It wouldn't be easy. They all knew that. But as Miss Rose always said, nothing worth having ever was. The January morning of Olivia's hearing arrived with a mix of sunshine and frost that made Pine Grove look like it had been dusted with diamonds. Destiny had barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing what she would say to the review board. As the youngest person scheduled to speak, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Miss Rose had laid out their clothes the night before, Destiny's navy blue dress that made her look older than her 15 years, and her own Sunday best. Sheriff Thompson arrived early, his police uniform pressed to perfection, a stack of documents tucked under his arm. "You ready?" he asked, his usual confident voice carrying a hint of nervousness. This case had become personal for him over the years, and everyone knew it. The courthouse stood imposingly against the winter sky, its brick facade telling stories of countless lives changed within its walls. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than Destiny had imagined, more intimate than intimidating. The board members sat behind a curved desk, their faces neutral but not unkind. Olivia was brought in wearing a simple black dress instead of her prison uniform, a small dignity granted for such hearings. Her hands were trembling as she sat, but her back was straight, her chin held high. When she caught sight of her daughter, her eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. The hearing began with formal statements. The prosecutor who had handled Olivia's original case spoke first, surprising everyone by supporting the early release. "In 15 years, he said, I've rarely seen such genuine rehabilitation and remorse." Then came character witnesses, the prison chaplain who spoke of Olivia's work with other inmates, the education coordinator who detailed her perfect academic record and mentoring of younger inmates, even a former inmate who had turned her life around with Olivia's help. Sheriff Thompson's testimony was particularly moving. He spoke of watching over the Williams family for 15 years, of delivering letters and seeing hope maintained across impossible distances. In my 30 years of law enforcement, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I've learned that justice without mercy isn't justice at all. When it was Destiny's turn to speak, she walked to the podium clutching the journal she'd made. The board members leaned forward, clearly interested in hearing from the person most affected by Olivia's incarceration. I used to think I knew what abandonment felt like, Destiny began, her voice gaining strength with each word. I thought my mother had chosen to leave me. But recently, I learned about choice of a different kind, the choice to protect someone you love, even if it means they might not understand. The choice to better yourself, even when it feels impossible. The choice to keep loving, keep trying, keep hoping. She opened the journal, sharing excerpts from Olivia's letters, showing the board the paper crane that had started her journey to understanding. My mother made mistakes, she continued, but she never stopped being my mother. She never stopped trying to guide me, even from behind walls. And now, I'm asking for the chance to know her without these walls between us. Miss Rose spoke last, her quiet dignity filling the room. She talked about raising Destiny, about maintaining the delicate balance between truth and protection, about watching her daughter struggle to become someone worthy of the second chance she hoped for. The board deliberated for what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes. When they returned, the head of the board, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, delivered their decision. Mrs. Williams, she began, looking directly at Olivia, your case has touched us deeply. Your commitment to rehabilitation, your dedication to helping others, and most importantly, your unwavering dedication to your daughter, these things speak to genuine transformation. Taking into account the new evidence regarding your limited role in the original crime, your exemplary record, and the strong support system awaiting you, this board has decided to grant your petition for early release. The words took a moment to sink in. Then Destiny felt her grandmother's arms around her, heard Sheriff Thompson's relieved sigh, saw her mother's shoulders shake with silent sobs. There would be conditions, of course, regular check-ins with a parole officer, mandatory counseling, employment requirements. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that in 2 weeks' time, Olivia Williams would walk out of prison a free woman. The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Miss Rose cleaned and recleaned the spare bedroom, turning it from a storage space into a warm welcome home for her daughter. The community, having heard the news through the small-town grapevine, rallied around them. Church members brought casseroles and offered job leads. Destiny's teachers expressed their support, with her social studies teacher even offering to help Olivia prepare for job interviews. Sheriff Thompson used his connections to find a position at a women's support center 2 towns over. They needed someone who could relate to their clients, he said. But amid the joy and preparation, Destiny noticed moments of anxiety in both her mother and grandmother. During their final prison visit before the release, Olivia confessed her fears. What if I don't know how to be a mother in the real world? She whispered, her fingers nervously folding a napkin into smaller and smaller squares. What if I disappoint you again? Destiny reached across the table, stopping her mother's fidgeting hands with her own. You've been mothering me through letters all these years, she said firmly. Now we just get to do it face to face. We'll figure it out together. The night before Olivia's release, Destiny couldn't sleep. She sat at her window, watching the stars and thinking about how tomorrow would be the last night she and her mother would look at the same stars from different places. The thought filled her with a mix of joy and terror that made her heart race. Miss Rose found her there, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders. Your mama's probably doing the same thing right now, she said softly. Looking at those stars, wondering about tomorrow. Are you scared, Grandma? Destiny asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at her. Terrified, Miss Rose admitted with a small laugh. But you know what? Fear means we're about to do something brave. And bringing this family back together, that's the bravest thing we could do. The morning of Olivia's release dawned clear and crisp, the kind of winter day that made everything look new and possible. Destiny stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her sweater for the 100th time, while Miss Rose bustled around the house making sure everything was perfect for their homecoming celebration. Sheriff Thompson arrived early, as had become his custom, but this time he brought something special, a small gift bag with a bow. "Just a little welcome home present," he said, placing it on the kitchen counter. His eyes were bright with emotion he tried to hide behind his professional demeanor. The drive to the prison felt different this time. Instead of the usual nervous tension, there was an electric anticipation in the air. They parked in the visitors' lot one final time, watching the high gates that had separated their family for so long. "Look," Destiny whispered, pointing to a flock of birds soaring overhead. They watched as the birds circled once, twice, before disappearing into the distance, free and unbound. Inside the processing area, they waited with barely contained impatience. The clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion. Then, suddenly, a door opened, and there she was, Olivia Williams, wearing civilian clothes, carrying a small box of possessions and looking simultaneously terrified and overjoyed. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Destiny broke away from the group, running to her mother and throwing her arms around her. The box clattered to the floor, forgotten, as Olivia held her daughter properly, without guards or time limits, for the first time in 15 years. "My baby girl," she whispered, over and over, her tears falling into Destiny's hair. "My beautiful baby girl." Miss Rose joined them, completing their circle. The 3 generations of Williams women stood there, holding each other, until Sheriff Thompson gently reminded them it was time to go home. Walking out of the prison was surreal. Olivia squinted in the bright sunlight, taking deep breaths of free air. Every step seemed to require conscious effort, as if she was learning to walk all over again, this time as a free woman. The car ride home was filled with quiet conversation and occasional comfortable silences. Olivia kept touching things, the car window, the seat belt, Destiny's hand, as if making sure everything was real. She pointed out changes in the landscape, buildings that hadn't been there before, trees that had grown taller. "Everything looks so different," she said softly. "So much bigger and brighter." As they turned onto Maple Street, neighbors came out onto their porches, waving and calling out welcomes. Someone had tied balloons to their mailbox, and a "Welcome Home" banner hung across the front porch. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled up again. Inside the house, everything had been prepared with loving care. The spare room, now Olivia's room, had been painted a soft yellow, with new curtains and a handmade quilt from the church ladies. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of all 3 of them from their first prison visit, next to the paper crane that had started their journey to healing. "We can change anything you don't like," Miss Rose said quickly, suddenly nervous about her decorating choices. But Olivia was already running her hands over the quilt, taking in every detail with wonder. "It's perfect, Mama," she whispered. "It's more than perfect." The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, church members bearing casseroles, neighbors with welcome gifts, even Destiny's teachers stopping by to introduce themselves. Each person was carefully chosen, vetted by Miss Rose to ensure they would be supportive rather than judgmental. Sheriff Thompson stayed longer than the others, helping to organize the food and making sure Olivia had all the information she needed about her upcoming appointments with her parole officer. Before he left, he finally gave her the gift bag he'd brought. Inside was a small silver key chain with 3 charms, a crane for hope, a rose for family, and a star for guidance. "To help you remember," he said gruffly, "that you've got people in your corner." As evening approached, the visitors thinned out, leaving the 3 Williams women alone together in their home for the first time. They moved around the kitchen preparing dinner together, learning each other's rhythms, occasionally bumping into each other and laughing. "I don't know how to do this," Olivia admitted at one point, looking lost as she tried to figure out where the plates belonged. "I don't know how to be normal." "None of us do," Miss Rose replied wisely. "We're all learning. That's what family is, learning together." After dinner, they sat on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill. Destiny nestled between her mother and grandmother, feeling the gentle sway of the swing and listening to the quiet sounds of their neighborhood settling into night. "Look," Olivia said suddenly, pointing upward. "The stars look different from here. Brighter somehow." "That's because you're looking at them with us," Destiny replied, squeezing her mother's hand. As they sat there, Destiny thought about all the changes that had brought them to this moment. The truth that had seemed so frightening at first had become their strength. The pain of separation had transformed into appreciation for togetherness. The fear of judgment had been overcome by the power of community support. Later that night, as Destiny lay in bed, she heard soft voices from the kitchen, her mother and grandmother talking, sharing memories, planning for tomorrow. The sound filled her with a peace she hadn't known she was missing. On her bedside table, the paper crane caught the moonlight, its wings casting shadows on the wall. Beside it lay her journal, now filled with not just letters but new memories, the beginning of their story as a complete family. Tomorrow would bring challenges, job searches, adjustments, learning to live together. But tonight, under one roof at last, they were simply 3 generations of strong women, bound by love that had survived prison walls, years of separation, and the weight of unspoken truths. As sleep finally came, Destiny smiled, knowing that sometimes the best stories aren't about perfect families, but about imperfect ones who choose to love each other anyway. Their journey wasn't ending, in many ways, it was just beginning. But now they would walk it together, under the same stars, in the same direction. The transition to normal life brought challenges that no one had fully anticipated. For Olivia, even the simplest tasks could become overwhelming, using a smartphone, navigating self-checkout machines at the grocery store, or dealing with the constant connectivity of modern life. But what proved most challenging was finding her place in her daughter's established routines. Destiny had grown up with certain ways of doing things: homework at the kitchen table while Miss Rose cooked dinner, Saturday morning grocery shopping followed by lunch at the local diner, Sunday afternoons spent reading on the porch swing. Now, there was a new person trying to fit into these patterns, someone who was both stranger and mother. One particular Wednesday afternoon highlighted the delicate balance they were all trying to maintain. Destiny had a major history project due, and she was struggling with the research. Normally, she would have asked Miss Rose for help, but Olivia eagerly offered her assistance. "I did a lot of reading while I was away," Olivia said, carefully avoiding the word prison as she often did. "Maybe I can help." They sat together at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and papers. Olivia's enthusiasm was evident, but her knowledge was outdated, and her suggestions didn't quite align with what Destiny's teacher wanted. The frustration built slowly until Destiny finally burst out, "That's not how we do it now, Mom. Everything's different." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia's face crumpled for just a moment before she composed herself, but that brief flash of pain was enough to make Destiny's heart ache. Miss Rose, who had been quietly folding laundry nearby, stepped in with her characteristic grace. "Why don't we all take a break?" she suggested. "I've got some fresh lemonade in the fridge, and maybe we can look at this together with fresh eyes." That evening, after Destiny had gone to bed, she overheard her mother crying softly in the kitchen. Miss Rose's gentle voice carried up the stairs, "Give it time, baby. Rome wasn't built in a day, and families don't rebuild themselves overnight either." The next morning, Destiny woke early and found her mother already in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. The counters were dusted with flour, and the smell of slightly burnt toast filled the air. Olivia looked up sheepishly. "I wanted to do something nice, but I'm afraid I'm making a mess of it." Instead of pointing out the chaos, Destiny grabbed an apron. "Show me what you're trying to make," she said. Together, they salvaged what they could and started fresh, with Destiny teaching her mother the little tricks she'd learned from Miss Rose over the years. As they worked, Olivia shared stories about cooking with Miss Rose when she was young, before everything went wrong. "Your grandmother taught me how to make her famous sweet potato pie when I was about your age," she said, carefully measuring flour. "I used to love watching her hands work the dough." "She still makes it the same way," Destiny replied, suddenly realizing how this moment was a bridge between past and present. Maybe we could all make it together sometime." The smile that lit up Olivia's face was worth every awkward moment they'd endured. Sheriff Thompson remained a constant presence in their lives, stopping by regularly to check on their progress and often bringing news about job opportunities for Olivia. His efforts finally paid off when the Women's Support Center offered her a part-time position as a peer counselor. "They were impressed by your story," he told her. "They think you could really help other women who are trying to rebuild their lives." The job became a turning point for Olivia. Having a purpose beyond being a mother and daughter helped her find her footing in the free world. She came home from work with stories about the women she'd helped, her eyes shining with the satisfaction of making a difference. Destiny noticed other changes too. Her mother started carrying herself differently, with more confidence. She began expressing opinions about current events, engaging in discussions at family dinner, and slowly but surely finding her voice in their household. But it wasn't just Olivia who was changing. Miss Rose was learning to share her role as primary caregiver, sometimes struggling to step back and let mother and daughter figure things out for themselves. And Destiny was discovering that having two strong women guiding her life meant twice the support, but also twice the expectations. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, during one of their regular Sunday afternoon reading sessions on the porch. Destiny was struggling with a particularly difficult English assignment, analyzing the theme of redemption in their current novel. "I just don't get it," she sighed, closing the book in frustration. "How can someone completely change their life? How do they make people believe they're different?" Olivia and Miss Rose exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Then Olivia took a deep breath and did something she rarely did. She talked about her time in prison. "Change isn't about making people believe in you," she said softly. "It's about believing in yourself enough to keep trying, even when it seems impossible. Even when you fail. Even when people doubt you." She went on to share stories about women she'd known inside, their struggles, their hopes, their small victories and devastating setbacks. As she spoke, Destiny began to see her mother in a new light. This wasn't just the woman who had missed 15 years of her life, this was someone who had faced her mistakes head-on and fought every day to become better. The conversation lasted well into the evening, with Miss Rose adding her own perspectives about watching Olivia's transformation from the outside. They talked about forgiveness, about second chances, about the courage it takes to change and the strength it takes to trust that change in others. By the time they finally went inside, Destiny had not only understood her English assignment better but had gained a deeper appreciation for the complex journey they were all on together. That night, as she worked on her essay, Destiny realized that their family's story was its own tale of redemption. Every awkward moment, every misunderstanding, every small triumph, they were all part of their path toward becoming whole again. She wrote about change not as a single moment of transformation, but as a series of daily choices. She wrote about forgiveness as something that happens not once but over and over, in the small moments of everyday life. And she wrote about love as the force that makes both change and forgiveness possible. When she shared the essay with her mother and grandmother the next day, there wasn't a dry eye on the porch. Because in telling the story of redemption from her novel, Destiny had also told their story, the story of three women learning to be a family again, one day at a time. As spring began to touch Pine Grove with its gentle warmth, the Williams family had settled into a new rhythm. The initial awkwardness had given way to a deeper understanding, though challenges still arose. It was during this time that Olivia received news that would test their newly strengthened bonds. The Women's Support Center where she worked was opening a new facility in a city 3 hours away. They wanted Olivia to help establish their rehabilitation program there, offering her a full-time position with better pay and more responsibility. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving Pine Grove. The news hit the family like a storm cloud on a sunny day. Destiny found her mother sitting alone on the porch swing that evening, turning her keychain charms over and over in her hands. "Are you going to take it?" Destiny asked, her voice small against the sound of cricket songs. Olivia looked up, her eyes filled with conflict. "I don't know, baby. It's a chance to help more women, to make a real difference. But..." She paused, reaching for her daughter's hand. "I just got you back. The thought of being away from you again, even for a few days at a time." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of their past separation. But something had changed in Destiny over the past months. Where once she might have felt abandoned all over again, now she saw the strength it took for her mother to even consider this choice. "You wouldn't be leaving me," Destiny said firmly. "You'd be showing me how to follow my dreams, even when they're scary." That weekend, they held a family council, something that had become their way of handling big decisions. Miss Rose made her famous sweet potato pie, and they gathered around the kitchen table to talk it through. "The city's not so far," Miss Rose reasoned, though her voice wavered slightly. "You could come home on weekends, and we could visit during school breaks." Sheriff Thompson, who'd become such a part of their family that his presence at these discussions was natural, added his perspective. "The program you'd be building could help hundreds of women reconnect with their families. Sometimes the hardest right thing and the best right thing are the same thing." The decision wasn't made that night, or the next. It took weeks of discussion, planning, and soul-searching. But in the end, Olivia accepted the position, with conditions she negotiated: regular trips home, flexibility for important school events, and the ability to work remotely when possible. The day Olivia left for her first week at the new facility, Destiny surprised everyone by handling it with unexpected grace. She helped her mother pack, wrote encouraging notes to hide in her suitcase, and stood strong during their goodbye hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered to her mother. "So proud to be your daughter." That evening, Miss Rose found Destiny in her room, surrounded by old letters and her journal. "You doing okay, baby girl?" Destiny looked up, her eyes clear and determined. "You know what I realized, Grandma? Mom's not really leaving this time. She's just spreading her wings a little wider. And maybe that means I can too." The following months brought changes for all of them. Olivia's program became a model for other centers across the state. She was featured in social justice magazines and invited to speak at conferences about rehabilitation and family reunification. Destiny threw herself into her studies with renewed purpose, inspired by her mother's dedication to helping others. She started a support group at school for students with incarcerated parents, using her own story to help others find hope and healing. Miss Rose, not to be outdone, began volunteering at the local prison, teaching cooking classes and sharing her wisdom with women who reminded her of her daughter years ago. The paper crane origami that had meant so much to their family became a symbol of hope in her classes. Their story began to ripple out into the community in unexpected ways. Other families dealing with incarceration reached out for guidance. The church started a ministry specifically for supporting families during and after imprisonment. Sheriff Thompson used their experience to advocate for more family-centered rehabilitation programs. 1 year after Olivia's release, they held a celebration. The house was full of people who had become part of their extended family, colleagues from the support center, members of Destiny's school group, women Miss Rose had taught in prison, and countless others who had been touched by their journey. During the celebration, Destiny shared something she'd been working on, a documentary about their family story, filmed with help from her school's media club. The raw honesty of their struggles and triumphs moved everyone to tears. "This isn't just our story anymore," Destiny said as the video ended. "It's a story about how love can survive anything if we're brave enough to let it grow and change." Olivia, who had come home for the weekend, stood up to address the gathering. "A year ago, I thought freedom meant walking out of prison. But real freedom, I've learned, is being able to choose love every day, even when it's hard. It's being able to let your daughter grow strong enough to handle your absence because she knows, without doubt, that you're coming back. It's watching your mother open her heart to help other families heal. It's seeing your story become a light for others. As the evening wound down, the three Williams women found themselves in their familiar spot on the porch swing. The spring air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers, and the stars above seemed to shine with particular brightness. "You know what?" Destiny said, looking between her mother and grandmother. "I used to think our story was about fixing what was broken. But now I think it's about discovering that some things were never broken at all, just waiting for the right time to bloom." Miss Rose squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "And some flowers," she said wisely, "need both sunshine and rain to grow strong." Olivia touched the paper crane charm on her key chain, a constant reminder of their journey. "And some families," she added, "need to be apart sometimes to learn how to be together better." The three generations sat there, united by love that had survived prison walls, separation, and the challenges of rebuilding. Their story wasn't perfect, there were still hard days, moments of doubt, and new challenges to face. But they had learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Love was. And love, they had discovered, was stronger than any barrier, more enduring than any separation, and more powerful than any mistake. As night fell over Pine Grove, their laughter mingled with the evening sounds, carrying a message of hope to anyone who might be listening, that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that begin with broken pieces and end with something stronger than what was lost. The paper crane on Destiny's bedside table caught the last rays of sunset, its wings casting shadows that looked remarkably like embracing arms. In its delicate folds lay the truth they had all learned, that love, like paper transformed by careful hands, could take broken things and make them fly.